do you think you're going if you haven't yet understood the difference between life and me?
If someone asked you what's the difference between life and death, how would you answer?
The living dead and the dying living are all the same.
You could always just give a technical answer, pull a definition from a dictionary, but you know it's more than just that. We both know that life is more than just breathing and that death is more than just the absence of it.
What do you think the rest of the world looks like?
But trying to find the words, trying to find a way to sum it all up is challenging. Such a difficult question deserves a complex answer.
I only ask because sometimes I think I made you all up.
And in the case of Cemetery Man, or its original title, Dellamorte Dellamore, it seems that this attempt at answering this question has led to a lot of confusion, as well as it being overlooked by many because a film that's hard to explain is often hard to recommend. Because I'm sure some of you right now are just thinking, isn't this that weird Italian horror comedy about a cemetery keeper who has to fight zombies? Yes. Yes, it is. But that isn't all that it is. It also happens to be one of the weirdest movies I have ever seen, and yet ever since I first saw it 3 years ago, I have not stopped thinking about it. I know if you've seen it, you can at least agree with that first part, because there are not a lot of films I could even compare this to. It's so weird and so different, and I have so much to say. This is your final warning to go and experience Francesco Dellamorte's story for yourself and to come to your own conclusions of what it all means in the film Dellamorte Dellamore. This and The Stuff both do such a good job of letting you know immediately that you're in for the most insane ride of a film that you could experience. All that has happened so far is that we zoomed out of a skull that is sitting on Francesco's desk as the phone rings nearby, and he answers it to talk to his friend Franco, telling him that he had to get out of the shower eventually, and it seems like it's just in time because there's a zombie businessman at his door. He literally just tells Franco on the phone 1 second, sets it down, walks over, sees the zombie, shoots it without a second glance, just walks back, picks up the phone, and is like, "Hey Franco, what'd you want?" And he's just calling to check on his friend, to ask him how he's doing.
You know, things are. Life goes on.
And that may just be the best way to sum up exactly what happens here in the Buffalo Cemetery. Because after 7 days of someone being buried, they then return back to life, which is why Francesco Dellamorte calls them returners and not zombies. I mean, the name does make sense, but what doesn't quite make sense to him is his own name. Francesco Dellamorte, Saint Francis of Death, as he claims, and then says that he's thought about having it changed a couple times. He believes that Andre Dellamorte would sound so much nicer, setting you up for the type of comedy that is here throughout the entire film. But one thing's for sure is that Dellamorte does fit him perfectly because he's constantly surrounded by and having to deal with death, which is his job after all. He's the watchman and main runner of the cemetery, but he doesn't do it alone because he also has an assistant, Gnaghi, who is not all there. We're never told what's going on with Gnaghi, whether mentally or anything else, but all we do know is that he's pretty good as an assistant here in the cemetery, and all he can say is "Nya." Though this doesn't stop Francesco and Gnaghi from having full-blown conversations. It may sound very one-sided at times, but it's clear from how Gnaghi reacts that Francesco is responding correctly and understanding him fully. How exactly this works, we're not sure. And neither is Francesco about if this is just happening here within the Buffalora Cemetery, or if this is actually happening everywhere else in the world and is some kind of crazy epidemic.
Who knows? And in the end, who cares? I'm just doing my job.
His job here within the cemetery, where they do actually get visitors, with Miss Pia Curamondo being there nearly every single day and always calling Francesco engineer, even though he constantly corrects her saying, "I'm not an engineer." But she's just doing her best to be kind and respectful of him and his position within the cemetery, as well as also being extra kind to Gnaghi, constantly calling him cutie, even though Francesco also lets Gnaghi know that he's not cute. He's not a cutie. He's always got something negative to say to Gnaghi, but this is also just a job for Gnaghi too, because he's always here either digging the graves or trying to deal with the leaves, and he hates it when the leaves get blown away. It just upsets him to no end. And while personally leaves don't bother me, you want to know what does? Making an appointment with the dentist and then explaining to them that you just changed your insurance and still need like another month before certain benefits actually kick in. But the dentist office tells you that they deal with this all the time, and you can actually go ahead and get the work done that you need done, and there's nothing to worry about because they'll take care of everything. Just for them to call you a few days later and go, "Whoops! It looks like we made a mistake, and now you owe us a bunch of money since your insurance doesn't seem to want to cover this yet." It still makes me irritated just talking about it now, and while we eventually figured it out, it took a while, and it would have been nice to have a free service that would allow you to see reviews of doctors in your area and actually filter them by your insurance. That would help out a ton. Save yourselves a headache and get that headache checked out by using ZocDoc. It's free and it can help you make your life so much easier and have a lot less stress. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/Polter to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor in your area for free today, so you can stop worrying about your tooth aching or if you're actually going to be able to have it covered by your insurance. That's ZocDoc.com/Polter. And thank you, ZocDoc, for sponsoring this video.
The most beautiful living woman I have ever seen.
Francesco spends the entire night wondering if he will ever see her again. And he does on the next day, where she's back in the cemetery, visiting the grave of who he mistakens as her father, but it turns out to be her husband. And instead of asking how long they were married, he instead asks how long has he been dead, to which she tells him 2 weeks. And of course, he says that's good, which makes her upset, but to his understanding of how everything works here is once you die, you're buried, and then 1 week later you rise again. But to him, because it's been 2 weeks since he died, he doesn't think he has to worry about him coming back. That, of course, would be a lot to explain to this now grieving widow that is the most beautiful woman he's ever seen standing right in front of him. So instead, he tries to backpedal a little bit, to which she immediately sees straight through and steps over close to him and tells him of just how incredible of a lover her husband was, seemingly making the point that Francesco doesn't stand a chance, regardless of what words he speaks or gestures he does to get close to her. None of it will be as good as her husband. She then leaves, Gnaghi continues with the leaves, and then that night he takes a very sad boy shower, just trying to deal with the fact that he really likes the way she looks, and he just wants a chance to get to talk to her again. Though the next day, instead of trying to track her down, he instead pays a visit to someone he might call a friend. He definitely calls him the only person that calls him, which is Franco. Francesco shows up at his office down at City Hall to just see him for a moment, to remind himself of what Franco looks like, since you can't live off of memories alone. And from what we can see here at Franco's office, he is swamped with work. There are just stacks of papers everywhere, and he's the only one here. But that doesn't stop him from asking Francesco if he had any more of those nightly visitors. And then he tells Francesco that he needs to meet with the mayor to see if he can get any help or solutions to this problem. But Francesco tells him that if the mayor finds out about what's going on down at the cemetery, that'll mean no more cemetery, no more job, and no more house for him. Franco then jokes about no one believing him anyway, but Francesco doesn't really care, just as long as he's getting paid. And it's in that lies his real problem, since he's having to deal with all of these returners at night, and he doesn't get paid to work nights, so that should technically be overtime, and he's not getting paid overtime, and that's not right. And Franco agrees, so he heads off to find the M3 form that he can then file with the mayor to explain, hey, I need to be getting paid a little more for my extra hours at night. If you could please take care of that. And Francesco just seems like that's all too much of a headache for him. So before Franco can find the papers in all of the stacks, Francesco leaves to head back to his home at the cemetery.
At a certain point in life, you realize you know more dead people than living.
That's just such a crazy line, and I have to believe that he's right. It would seem like at some point in your life, you would have known more people that have already gone on ahead of you, but I don't know where exactly that line would be. I do know that there are many other lines like this one throughout the film that have a deeper meaning and truth behind them, but because they're all surrounded by or covered up with just weirdness and comedy, they don't really stick with you until you go back and think about what is really being said here. And maybe the other reason that you don't pick up on all of this right away is because of how the pacing is in the film. It's constantly on to the next thing, just like here, as we see that all of the graves are hand dug by the two of them, or maybe just Gnaghi, because each time that Francesco is digging, Gnaghi shows up and he's like, hey, I'll get you an ice cream if you dig this grave for me instead. Just like here, where we see Gnaghi being the one to dig the grave while Francesco is reading the newspaper, likely looking over all of the obituaries, until she returns and Francesco jumps just out of the grave and finds her, but he doesn't say anything. And it's as she goes to leave that he follows behind and apologizes for what happened just the other day and tells her that he has a degree in biology. He says that this is his job and tries to just be like, hey, I've got a nice house. Please just talk to me. Don't leave. But she continues without him until he says, we have a really nice ossuary if you would like to see it. This stops her in her tracks. Because of course, who wouldn't want to go see a really cool old ossuary? I didn't even know what an ossuary was until making this video. Apparently though, she knows that it's just another room to where they take all of the skeletal remains after all of the flesh has decayed off of the bodies buried in the cemetery, and they put them in the building. And this is a real ossuary that they are filming in, and it makes me wonder if they flooded the floor for this scene, or if there was just a leak in the roof and they went in to film, because according to some of the crew members that worked here, they removed some of the bones during the filming of this scene, I'm assuming that it's only some, which means that some of the bones in this scene are probably real. But after they did this, they claim to have encountered an angry ghost and quickly replaced all of the bones back into the ossuary as to not be haunted for the rest of this shoot. She finds all of this very exciting. She actually says this out loud as she removes her shoes and just steps off into this gross water within the ossuary. I don't even want to know what would be in here since it's a real ossuary. Turns out she really likes it here. Enough that she even tries to kiss Francesco, but first has to cover his face with a red cloth that she just so happens to find laying on the ground, probably covering a bunch of skulls. No telling where it was from or exactly what was wrapped in it, but them kissing here in this scene does resemble the painting of the lovers. But it's as they hold each other and continue to kiss through their veils that the camera begins spinning around them to the point that she becomes kind of confused, even pulling away and blaming this place for forcing her into doing this, as she then backs into the skeleton that is hanging on the wall that falls down onto her, causing her to pull away as it rips the top of her shroud off. She sprints her way out of the ossuary and heads back into the cemetery, leaving behind Francesco, who eventually finds her veil blown away as she drops flowers down at her bare feet, and they embrace in the moonlight, holding one another and kissing passionately. It really is a beautiful shot here with them being silhouetted in the moonlight. But after this, we find them lying next to her husband's grave as Ignis Fatuus flies over and squeaks all around them as they continue to kiss on the ground. Francesco wonders why here of all places, and she claims that they never kept anything from one another, and she would want him to know if she was in a new relationship. And it's here that we see Gnaghi eating a plate of spaghetti. This won't be the last time. It's just this random shot of Gnaghi eating spaghetti. And then when we cut back, we see the two of them embracing even more in the moonlight, just out here in the open in the middle of the cemetery, until they are interrupted by her dead and now returned husband. Francesco begins yelling for Gnaghi to bring the gun as she screams and apologizes to her husband, falling backwards as he attacks her and begins biting on her shoulder, giving Francesco just enough time to run over and pick up a big iron cross and bringing it down, crushing her husband's rotten skull. It was only a moment. He moved as quick as he could, but it still wasn't fast enough as he can't stop the bleeding. Gnaghi finally arrives as Francesco is just holding her, pleading for her to not fall asleep, to not leave him, and he yells for Gnaghi to run and get the doctor. And Gnaghi doesn't fully understand what is happening, turning back to see his friend and try to figure out exactly what he needs to do, but all he needs to do in this moment is listen to Francesco, who is screaming at him to just go and get the doctor. As he lifts her up in his arms, he makes his way back into his house. He lays her on his bed, and it seems that it is far too late. As she lies dying right in front of him, right here in his arms, in his bed, he tells her that nothing can and nothing will ever be able to separate them.
Not even death.
Not even death.
But death still takes her. The next day, Marshal Stranero, the local police detective, arrives to speak with Francesco to figure out exactly what happened last night and get the full understanding of what Dr. Vercesi's report really means, to which Francesco begins to explain that it was her husband that killed her. And Stranero actually runs with this line of thinking for a moment, saying it out loud, so he can really hear how crazy it sounds, explaining that her dead husband crawled out of his grave in the middle of the night when she just so happened to be there visiting him, sexually assaulted her, and then killed her. And Francesco's just like, no, he just killed her. That was the only part that he had to do with any of it. And it's here that they actually bump into Dr. Vercesi, who was just waiting around the corner with a death certificate already drawn up with his findings that it wasn't actually the bite that killed her. Instead, he claims that her heart stopped from fear and that she died while making, well, doing it. That's an exact quote from the movie. Immediately, Strunero turns back to Francesco and proclaims that he is no longer a suspect, to which Francesco says, why not? But Strunero doesn't want to say. He doesn't want to be the one to have to say it out loud. It's Francesco's business. Don't bring him into this. So Francesco's just like, fine, I'll say it. It's because I'm impotent, isn't it? So much is wrong here, from the detective work to the doctor's claims, but it's all delivered in this very comical way that a lot of it can go missed. Even the next line, as they walk a little more and Strunero tries to comfort Francesco about his impotence. And Francesco just presses on, asking if she had any relatives, and Strunero's just like, nope, no relatives, no friends. How would he know? How would he know? Who has he spoken to? That's so many questions. But the rain cuts most of them short as the doctor and detective now head to leave. Francesco asks if he can keep her here, and they don't care. They just say, as long as you cover the funeral cost, you can do whatever you want with her. And we then hear Dr. Vercesi asking Strunero if they're all wrapped up here now. And Strunero says yes, other than there being a killer just on the loose somewhere, which I guess makes for a perfect time for them to go and get tea. We pick back up with Francesco and her body in the ossuary again, where he has her laid out and covered with a thin veil, and sitting next to her, he admits that he lied. He actually doesn't have a degree in biology. He never even finished high school. He's only ever read 2 books in his entire life. One he didn't finish, and the other is the phone book, which apparently he did finish, and this will come back up multiple times throughout the movie. But it's here that he's finally being truthful with her after it's too late.
I don't want her to become a returner. I don't want to see her again.
For as much as he wishes, it's just not up to him, as he sits at the very end of the table that she is laying on, and he begins to nod off until she sits up with the blanket covering her like a veil, and she begins to call for him, and he tries to deny her, even covering his eyes as he holds up his gun, and the veil gets caught in the wind, passing from her over to him right as he pulls the trigger and sends her back to death. So much happens so fast in this movie because this whole scene is done really well, but immediately we're on to the next part where he is out there digging her grave. And I love how Gnaghi walks over and sits down beside him with just this look of concern on his face, but Francesco doesn't give it any thought as he jumps out of the hole and tells Gnaghi to dig. But it takes him bribing Gnaghi with ice cream to actually get him moving, and then we're all of a sudden over in town so they can get that ice cream, as they then park the car and we hear a group of bikers immediately making fun of Francesco because his problem that Strunero even knew about is very well known all over town, and this group of bikers really enjoy making fun of him about it. We see them do it earlier when he goes to see Franco, but you don't really pick up on exactly what they're saying or why until you realize what they're talking about. And it's clear that what they believe about Francesco is not that he is just impotent, but instead that there is nothing even there. And Francesco and Gnaghi pass through them, ignoring them, even claiming that he was the one that started the rumor. He tells Gnaghi the more they laugh, the further away they seem, and you can never be too different, and then quickly follows it up by saying that maybe Gnaghi can, because Gnaghi's weird. The bikers are not the only group that they encounter on their way to get ice cream, because before they can make it to the restaurant, they're stopped by the mayor, who we can actually see on what I assume is the restaurant, his campaign posters that are covered in graffiti. Problem is, I can't read this poster, so if somebody can read this, please let me know exactly what is said on here, what the graffiti is. I think it would be neat to know what they wrote on here to see how other people in the community view the mayor. We have a bit of an idea with how he goes about his campaign throughout the rest of the film, but we only really get his side of everything, and he sucks on his own. But that doesn't stop him from being respectful and kind to Engineer Dellamorte as he invites him over to sit and stay for a moment at their table, meaning that Gnaghi's gonna have to wait on his ice cream, and that's cool. I guess it's so weird to see them sit down and to notice the other people at the table, because I can't figure out who these people are or why exactly they're all connected, other than the mayor just likes to chat with a whole myriad of local townsfolk. And just as no one here acknowledges the random group of kids that are just running in like hordes down the street, the mayor also doesn't acknowledge Francesco when he sits down. He doesn't talk to him about anything, just continues on in the conversation with whoever is also sitting here at the table. And Gnaghi is immediately infatuated with the mayor's daughter, Valentina. She does begin to speak, not necessarily to Gnaghi, as she seems quite confused at what he is. Her first question is, "Daddy, what's this?" And then constantly referring to Gnaghi as it, even going as far as to ask her father to buy Gnaghi for her. It's all very weird, and Gnaghi is no better, as he just constantly drools on himself, eventually getting too excited by having Valentina speak to him. So he throws up right on her. Gnaghi knew it was coming, and Francesco also knew that this was about to happen, because he tells Valentina to scoot over. She doesn't listen. She's not listening to anything he's saying. He even looks over at the mayor and says, "Hey, if you wouldn't mind having your daughter scoot over." Sometimes Gnaghi gets a little too excited, but nobody listens in this moment. No one seems to even care to avoid what should have been very avoidable in this moment. But here we are, Gnaghi standing up in shock, Valentina falling backwards onto the ground, and Claudio having just arrived on his motorcycle, wondering what in the world Valentina is doing down there.
He threw up on me, Claudio.
Oh, new fad.
I love this line so much. Like, he chose this, and it gets even better, because instead of denying what he said or explaining any further, she just hops up and says, "I knew you'd understand," and gets on the bike, still covered in vomit, and they ride away together, just as Gnaghi runs off, embarrassed at what just happened. And Francesco's just like, "Hey man, by the way, sometime me and you need to talk about what's going on at the cemetery," as he then leaves to go after Gnaghi. And the mayor's just like, "Haha, the youth of today, they're so emotional." This whole scene, it's so weird and hilarious, and I don't know what to think. New fad. Again, there's so much more going on here with just everything. Like, the underlying truth and deeper meaning of the film is just covered in weird scenes like this. And we can see just a little bit of that deeper meaning as Francesco gets in his car and chases down Gnaghi, trying to comfort him and get him into the ride to go to the cemetery together. And Gnaghi just isn't having it. No matter what Francesco says in this moment when he's talking about this not being the first time something like this has happened, and her understanding it's just a way that he's showing his excitement and affection, to even talking about which love matters most, whether first or last. And it's as Gnaghi gets up and runs into the cemetery that we see Mrs. Coramondo again, now leaving, being very sad because there was nobody there today. And Francesco just huffs and rolls his head around, looks at her and says, "Come again, stay a while," and floors it up through there, leaving her behind. As I said, everything's just constantly on to the next thing, but here, as they make it back that evening, it seems like they finally get a moment to slow it all down. As we see Francesco lying on his bedroom floor, looking at the phone books again, and also going through the obituaries in the newspaper, scrapbooking them over as Francesco then marks the name out of the phone book. And down below him, in the room underneath that is, I guess, technically in the basement, he can hear Gnaghi and see him through the crack in the floor. And he tries telling him stuff like, "You'll get over it. And time passes, it just gets worse." Then Francesco gets all kind of upset because of how difficult it is to comfort Gnaghi. So he then gets mad at him, being like, "What were you even doing with the mayor's daughter anyway? She's only a child." To which Gnaghi screams back, and Francesco's like, "No, that's not true. You are not a child. You're older than me. And if we're going off of Rupert Everett's actual age here, that would mean that Gnaghi is 36. I have thoughts, but for now, we just need to know that Gnaghi mentally is placing himself at the same age as a child, likely even younger than that of Valentina. Regardless, though, Francesco just tells him that one of these days, he will settle down with some poor creature like himself. And it's lines like this that Francesco constantly says towards Gnaghi that really does seem to get to him over time by pulling him down. Something that we will see over and over again as the story unfolds. But for now, Francesco just tells Gnaghi that one thing is for certain when it comes to women.
They all end up here sooner or later, Gnaghi. Often sooner than later.
And while Francesco isn't right about everything, he is right about this, as we then see Valentina riding on the back of Claudio's motorcycle with a bunch of their friends. They're all having a good time, just going as fast as they can. She's screaming for them to go faster. Claudio's even joking like, "If only your dad could see us, he would be so angry." Right as they go around a corner and get crushed by a bus full of Boy Scouts. We not only see the chaos of Valentina getting her head mushed into nothingness by the tires, but we also get to see a reaction of a nearby horse. Everyone dies. Everybody on the motorcycle, everybody in the bus, everybody dies. Francesco was right. It was definitely sooner than later. The next thing we see is the funeral. There's tons of people, tons of coffins, even more scouts singing a song about how they never should have gone on the Boy Scout picnic. And of course, there's also Stranero here telling Francesco everything that happened as they have a good laugh about the slaughter of innocents. And after this, Francesco's just like, "Well, we got a bunch of work to do." And he tells Gnaghi that they're definitely going to need more bullets. We see just after this, just a line of coffins with everybody crying and sad, with one girl in particular throwing herself onto Claudio's grave, screaming about how she has lost her love, until she is pulled away by Claudio's mother, explaining that no, you were not his love. Claudio was promised to the mayor's daughter, not you, but she continues to cry and deny this. Just down the line from Claudio is the mayor, who is leaning over on Valentina's glass coffin and speaking with Francesco and Gnaghi about his daughter and how all of this is just so tragic. She was alive and well just yesterday. Everything was fine. Even Gnaghi threw up on her and she took it so well. And of course, all of this has to happen right as the elections are around the corner. It's all so tragic and causes Gnaghi to step forward and for Francesco to go and fetch another shovel. It's along the way that Claudio's real girlfriend chases him down to question him about what she has heard that goes on here in the cemetery, if the dead really do come back to life or not. And Francesco doesn't really give her any answers. He just basically tries to brush her off because, of course, he's got work to do. And then that evening, we see him in the shower again with Gnaghi also eating more spaghetti, as then the returners begin to return. Francesco Dellamorte has to live up to his name and kill a bunch of Boy Scouts, zombie Boy Scouts, that he has to basically deal with all on his own because Gnaghi is downstairs watching his TV with headphones on to keep him from hearing everything that is going on. But not just everything that is going on up above him, everything that is going on in his room while he's watching TV. He is so unconcerned with everything that is happening that Francesco is literally shooting at zombies and bashing their brains in just feet away from him. And Gnaghi not once moves to help or even pay attention to him. Francesco even losing his gun at one point and having to take them on the old-fashioned way and definitely living up to his name of Dellamorte. One of the other scouts is even able to get a hand on Francesco's gun and then actually being able to pull the trigger multiple times, missing every shot and giving Francesco enough time to run over and kill this one. And then another one is standing next to Gnaghi as Francesco turns and shoots it and it falls onto Gnaghi. And Gnaghi just pushes it off in the floor because he's focused on his TV. But when it does, it lands on the remote to the TV, causing it to no longer be playing the audio through the headphones, and instead through the screen right as a scream is let out, and Francesco turns to shoot the TV. They then both just take a moment and stand there in shock looking at the now very broken TV, as Francesco was just like, that sucks. Sorry, man, but since you're up, hey, I need your help outside because we got a lot of work to do, so let's go. Poor Gnaghi. He just wanted to watch his TV. That was like the one thing he had in his room, and now it's broken. But he doesn't have time to even think about this right now because they really do need to go and deal with all of these returners that are out in the cemetery, and it's as they're walking around that they begin to hear crying off in the distance until they finally find Claudio's girlfriend grabbing onto his grave and just crying about how he needs to come back. Claudio, don't leave me. Come back, Claudio. And it's at this that the ground begins shaking like crazy as Francesco's yelling for her to come over here, to jump out of the way, to get to safety. And she just continues to cry out for Claudio as he comes flying out of the grave on his motorcycle. And it's the coolest thing you've ever seen. I mean, it really is just the coolest thing, watching him like fly out of the ground on his motorcycle, and Claudio himself looks incredible. He's even got like part of the clock flashing in his eye, I assume, from the bus. Everything about Claudio looks awesome. This is so cool. But regardless of this, it doesn't stop Francesco from trying to put an end to Claudio, but he just can't seem to get a shot as all three of them chase after the bike and Gnaghi even throwing a shovel before they take a moment to gather themselves, allowing for Claudio's girlfriend to get out ahead of them and falling down as she's calling for him, saying, "Help me, hold me, love me, please, Claudio, Claudio, you only love me, right?" And apparently he does, as he reaches his hand out and she hops on the bike and they ride off just as Francesco misses a shot, because apparently the gun always shoots to the right when it's cold. They continue walking through the cemetery looking for more returners, as well as following after Claudio and his girlfriend, where eventually they do catch up with Claudio, who is currently eating his girlfriend. And being held at gunpoint, she tells Francesco to stop. "He's only eating me." And Francesco demands for her to move aside.
Mind your business! I shall be eaten by whoever I please!
But this is his business. He gets paid to do this, and it's just as Claudio moves to speak or scream that Francesco shoots him in the head. But he also hits the girlfriend because she didn't listen. She didn't move out of the way, and now they will be together forever. And after all, to Francesco, they are the same, the living dead and the dying living, all cut from the same cloth. The only difference is the reaction, since getting rid of the dead is a public service, while killing the living gets you in all kinds of trouble. And while he says this, it's clear that on and from his face, he's struggling with having just killed a living person. Either way, they bury them together back in Claudio's grave. And it makes me wonder, like, who put the bike in there in the first place? Like, did they put it back afterwards? Because it looked really cool with him just flying out of the ground like that on a motorcycle, but why was it there in the first place? But a bigger question that I have is from the next scene, where the next day, Gnaghi is at Valentina's grave playing his violin, something that the actual actor Francois Hadji Lazaro could actually do, being that he is a musician, or was. He died here a couple years ago now. But back in this time, he was the leader of multiple different bands, from Pageli to Les Garcons Bouchiers and Los Carios, as well as a solo career. I don't know if I said any of those right, but it's so crazy to see him in like a music video or to hear him singing, and then to think of him in this role here. It's just so different, as well as awesome. You should go check out some of his music. But my question comes from what happens after he stops playing the violin. It's here that Gnaghi checks his watch, knowing that it is about time for her to come back. And so he begins digging at Valentina's grave and makes it all the way down to her glass coffin right as she opens her eyes. But her head was crushed by the bus. Like, we saw that. Both tires run right over the top of it. And so according to what we get from the film, she shouldn't be able to come back because her brain was no more. Just like classic zombie rules, but here she is, alive, after someone spent a lot of time putting her back together and stitching her up. Now, I don't think this is a plot hole. There is an entire layer of criticism against different professions and facilities throughout the film, from the police with Stranero and political offices with the mayor to even doctors with Francesi. But it seems like here, someone is very good at their job and they are giving more care to the dead than they are the living. Because even earlier, Francesco, with that skull that is on his desk, he struggles so much to put it together, and it will come back up, but that has much larger pieces than what would have been left of Valentina, telling me, and you that unlike everyone else in this film, there is someone here that is very good at their job. Anyway, though, we see that Valentina is 14. Yep, Gnaghi is digging her up so he can spend more time with her, but once he notices that her eyes are open, he shatters the glass and just pulls her head right off. He sets her down beside the grave as she begins speaking to him, asking his name, Gnaghi, if she has ever seen him before, and he fake throws up, and she, of course, remembers, and then she says that it was cute. They then kiss, and Gnaghi leads the way back to his room where Valentina's head scurries along the ground after him. I don't know. What? Again, Gnaghi isn't all there. He only ever speaks in the single sound of nya and believes that he is a child like Valentina. It's weird, yes, but there's also a ton of other weird stuff that's going on here in the film that we haven't even got to yet. My assumption with all of this is that it's meant to be in direct contrast to the relationship that Francesco has with her. But we never get her name, so of course I'm always going to have to call Anna Fauci's character she or her throughout this. The relationship that Gnaghi and Valentina have is far less physical. It's a lot more emotional, just like the mayor said earlier, and maybe even one that you could call intellectual. Now, you probably wouldn't think this right away by seeing how Gnaghi is, but we see him do something that Francesco has been struggling with this entire time. It's with the skull that is on his desk, as when Francesco is away, Gnaghi walks over, takes all of the pieces, and completely assembles the skull without any issues. He then tears it apart the moment that he hears Francesco approaching, to which Francesco tells him,
If I can do it, imagine you.
Francesco even calls this task one of the most difficult things in the world, and there is no way that Gnaghi would ever be able to do something that Francesco can't. Gnaghi then puts together a plate of spaghetti with bread and bananas and a bunch of other random stuff on top, to which Francesco just calls him disgusting, but then agrees with him, saying, well, I guess it does all end up in the stomach together in the end anyway. To which Gnaghi then laughs and oddly makes his way out of the room with 2 plates. As Francesco listens very closely to hear Gnaghi giggling with someone below in his room. And obviously we know that it's Valentina, but Francesco doesn't know this quite yet. And before he finds out, he hears something else outside and heads to investigate. A part of the thin veil sheet that she was covered in earlier is found hanging on a branch. And eventually, he finds her. Francesco is in shock as she comes flying into his arms, and he says that they can't because he's still alive and that she is dead, and yet they still begin to kiss as she removes his gun without him noticing and drops it nearby into the water, and then rips open his shirt and bites into his neck. He screams and he smiles this bloody smile as he falls backwards, right as Gnaghi brings down the shovel into her skull, officially putting an end to her. Still covered in blood, Francesco realizes what happened as he says that he killed her.
The first time when her husband bit her, she wasn't really dead.
When she woke up and he shot her with his eyes covered, she was still alive. He had killed the only woman that he had ever loved, and this is why we don't see her earlier being shot through the eye or the forehead. Instead, she gets shot just through the right part of her skull, meaning that it must have been cold in the ossuary that night. But again, this also means that Dr. Vercesi is an idiot. He wasn't even able to recognize that she was actually alive when he did such a thorough investigation of her body to find out and declare that she had died while doing it. Those are his words, which should have told you in the beginning, this guy should not be a doctor. Luckily, though, the doctor isn't here to mess anything up even more. Instead, who we have is Gnaghi, who is doing his best to just comfort his friend, even when Francesco is screaming about how it was his fault. Francesco's fault that he killed the only woman that he's ever loved. Gnaghi tries to deny what he's saying, gesturing at himself to let him know that Gnaghi was the one that killed her here and now, and without any actual words, Gnaghi's already done so much more to comfort his friend than what Francesco could earlier. After a little bit of time, they get themselves together, and we don't see them rebury her, but I'm thinking that that was Gnaghi's job, as Francesco heads inside and begins to wonder about this bite that he has, leaving us with the question of, do normal zombie rules apply here? Because we've seen multiple people be bit, but that wasn't the thing that made them into returners. Though Francesco wonders if this will infect him to where he will then become a returner later when he dies. And then he begins to think about Gnaghi having to be the one to bash his brains in with a shovel, to which he claims Gnaghi could never do it. Even though, when he turns around, there is Gnaghi, ready with the shovel to end him now. But since the one bite didn't kill him, Francesco tells him that there's no need, he needs to calm down. Now, according to the director, Michele Soavi, the returners get their energy from the mandragora roots in the cemetery. Meaning that no, normal zombie rules don't really apply here as we would think of it like an infection. This is why most of the zombies we get have like this really cool look with roots and stuff growing off of them, because it's the plants that are essentially infecting them, reminding me a lot of like The Last of Us with the cordyceps. It's this super cool idea that I looked a lot more into to see how the mandragora species really works. And of course, there's like a long running tradition with them being used in different medical practices, from aphrodisiacs to hypnotics to even sedatives and pain killing effects. There's so many different ways that they've been used across history and across many different cultures, including even in folklore with the actual mandrakes. I found it all very interesting to read about and spent probably way too much time going down that rabbit hole. Anyway, it's all very cool stuff, and while I wish the film would have explored this thought more, I understand why it didn't. I also understand why Francesco doesn't know any of this, because he just works here, and he's only ever read the phone book. And it's phone books that Gnaghi dumps into a burning pile of leaves the next day, which immediately causes Francesco to freak out, since of course this is his favorite reading material. It doesn't matter whether or not they've got the new and updated copies, these are all classics. What is in the world? What does he think he's doing? But this isn't the only thing that really gets under Francesco's skin. It's also constantly being called engineer by Mrs. Currimando. Every time he tries to tell her that he isn't an engineer, but here she is finally explaining why she does this so often. It's just because he's the caretaker of the cemetery. And to my understanding, engineer is just a respectful term used in Italian culture, often being used to refer to somebody that is more educated than yourself. But Francesco knows that he didn't finish school and likely sees himself as not deserving of such a title. But to those around him, they respect him and what he does regardless. Mrs. Currimando's reason for speaking with Engineer Dellamorte today is to get his opinion on which image she should have on her tombstone. One of her now, or one from when she was young. And Engineer Dellamorte tells her both. And again, she thanks him and calls him a handsome young man, to which we see him shaking his head no before she leaves and passes Gnaghi with the wheelbarrow full of phone books. She calls Gnaghi a cutie again, to which she seems to appreciate and has this big smile before he actually dumps all of Francesco's favorite reading material into the fire, which of course, as we know, makes Francesco mad, and that makes Gnaghi sad, and then he walks off with his head down, just upset at what has happened. And while it's too late to save the books, this does lead to one of the coolest scenes in the entire film, as the burnt pages get caught up in the wind and death visits Francesco to deliver him a message.
Stop killing the dead. They're mine.
Death instead suggests that he just begin killing the living. Shoot them in the head so he doesn't even have to worry about them returning. This whole scene looks awesome, sounds awesome, is awesome, and even Francesco looks like he isn't sure of what is real or if he's just beginning to lose his mind from breathing in too many phone book fumes. Death even has to ask him if he's listening, and according to what happens next, it seems like he was. We find him cutting X's into the top of each one of his revolver's rounds, essentially doing his best to make a somewhat hollow point for the most amount of damage to the skull. This tedious task is interrupted by a phone call from Franco and a zombie at the door. The returners are just a nuisance at this point, easy to deal with, but still have to be dealt with. So Francesco shoots them, Gnaghi moves them, and Franco talks on the phone. At first asking about the gunshot, but then just ignoring them. It appears like he is also working late, since he says that the call is from City Hall. But in response to Francesco talking about the daily grind, Franco says that he sometimes thinks about shooting himself. Almost as though he didn't even say it, Francesco asks how are things in his life? How are his wife and daughter?
I only ask because sometimes think I made you all up.
We don't hear his response to any of these questions, just the occasional laugh from Francesco as he continues the conversation and keeps blasting away at all of the zombies that step into the doorway. After there's no more returners, we catch the end of their conversation, and it's here that the movie really begins to shift. Because most zombie films would have our main character searching for a reason to figure out why the zombies are coming back to life, or trying to find a way to end this epidemic, but instead, this is just his job. He doesn't really seem to care to find an answer to any of this, just as long as he's getting paid. The real problem is the one that him and Franco share. It's that they both feel stuck. Stuck here in Buffalora like flies on flypaper. To Francesco, the only way for Franco to actually get out is alone. As he says, one day he will see his wife will get tired of him and his daughter will grow to hate him. And it's at that point that he will be free. Free to see the rest of the world and what it is like. Which brings forth the question from Franco of what does Francesco think the rest of the world looks like?
Who knows if the rest of the world even exists?
One of the things that I really love about horror is how much it can say through the scares, which is why I think this movie is so interesting, because not only is it using the scares to say something, but it's also doing this with the comedy. Hopefully by now you've started to pick up on the fact that there is a lot more going on under the surface. because it should be clear by now that this is not just some weird zombie horror comedy. Francesco may not see that there is a point to any of this, but he has clearly been wrong about quite a bit up to this point, though it may still be that heartache of losing the only woman he has ever loved that is driving him to madness. Because later that night, that's exactly what he is doing, since we see him drive into town, find that group of guys that have been making fun of him for the entirety of the film as he kills all of them, really taking death at his word and getting ahead of his work. The next morning, Detective Strunero comes knocking at Francesco's door, questioning him about where he was last night. And Francesco's just like, I don't know, man, I was here at my house, why? And the detective explains that there was somebody seen driving his car last night that went out and killed 7 people, to which Francesco tells him that that's impossible. Nobody could drive that car but me. Really doing himself no favors here in this investigation, but Strunero still admits that he doesn't believe that it was Francesco. Instead, he thinks it was his assistant, Gnaghi, and demands to speak with him now. So as they step outside, Francesco just requests that he get the opportunity to speak with Gnaghi alone first, and Strunero just tells him to hurry up, and then comments about how bad it smells just outside of Gnaghi's door. This is because of Valentina. She is really beginning to rot. Up to this point, Francesco hasn't actually known that she was here, but he doesn't really seem to even care that Gnaghi has the head of the mayor's now zombie daughter inside of his broken TV where she can sing to him as he plays his violin. Instead, he just tries to tell Gnaghi that he had a dream last night about killing 7 real people. All of this extreme oddness is interrupted by an important visitor who is there to see Francesco, but even without this, Gnaghi and Valentina don't seem to really care what he had to say. Instead, they just go back to singing. There comes a time when death is sad, we're all alone, it feels so bad. A very interesting song that I can only assume is something original. More interesting still is the important visitor. It's the mayor, who is here after the tragedy of 7 people having died last night to take advantage of Valentina's death so he can secure those juicy votes with his newest campaign to show that he is just like them.
If you've had a death in the family, vote for someone who suffers like you.
But photos of him next to his daughter's grave isn't enough. No, how could it be? Instead, his plan is to have Francesco dig up the grave and take pictures of Valentina's dead body to then have them plastered all over posters all over town with a tagline about how much he suffers and just how sad he is. This film's over 30 years old now, and it still has so much to say. There is, however, a problem with the mayor's plan, and that's the fact that Valentina's body is headless. This is where we get one of the best ever gifts and one of the funniest lines in the film, since upon seeing the headless daughter, the mayor asks engineer Dellamorte, "What's the meaning of this?" And he just shrugs. He just does this. It's this gif. It's just, I have this saved to my phone and use it pretty often. The mayor does get an answer to his question, though, from Valentina herself as she begins to call for him, to which again, he asks another question, and if anyone else heard that, and Strunero just says, "I don't know, it depends." Depends on what? What kind of detective, marshal, policeman person are you? Again, he's just as good at his job as the mayor is. But in the words of Francesco himself, the plot thickens. The mayor follows the voice of his daughter and eventually finds her and her smell with Gnaghi. The craziness of all of this happens so quick. The mayor walks in and is like, "Valentina, why are you on the TV?" And then he asks why she is there with this horrible thing, referring to Gnaghi, and she just says that she isn't that great of a catch either, and this is Gnaghi. She then asks for her father's permission to marry Gnaghi, to which he says, not gonna happen, not as long as he has a breath in his body. So she tells him that that can be arranged, as she then flies out of the TV across the room and bites him on the neck. They go tumbling back across the room as she's tearing at his neck. He's bleeding all over the place. The mayor begins yelling for Engineer Dellamorte to help him to do something as he pulls his gun and says, "I'm not an engineer," and puts an end to Valentina once and for all, causing both of them to collapse on the ground, Gnaghi to be in shock, Stranero to enter and question them on exactly what just happened, Francesco to assure him that this'll probably just be another unsolved case. As then the cameraman also enters the room to take a picture of all the chaos. Hopefully you're ready for this film to begin to really spiral off into the weirdness, because it only speeds up from here. First though, we get a little more about our main character. That evening when he is sitting with Gnaghi in the moonlight, doing a little better job at actually comforting him, Francesco Dellamore says that his mother's maiden name was Dellamore, Francesco Dellamorte Dellamore, or Francesco of Death, of Love. And as important as that is to the point of the entire film, it doesn't stop him from doing his job and making sure that everyone is in their graves, but someone is up and running around, not being a good example to the rest of them like he's supposed to be. It's the mayor attempting to climb his way out of the cemetery, but who was caught just before he's able to leave, and Francesco tells him to get back to his grave, and the mayor looks at him and says, "You can't stop me. You owe your job to me." And Francesco simply says, "Go back now, or I'll shoot."
You can't. I'm the mayor.
X.
The new mayor, Mayor Civardi, shows up on what I will assume is the next day to speak with Francesco while him and Gnaghi are now installing barbed wire all the way around the top of the cemetery wall, you know, to keep people from climbing out. But Civardi isn't here to introduce himself as the new mayor or anything like that. He is here because an M3 report was filed detailing an issue with the dead coming back to life, though since Francesco wasn't the one to actually file this, the new mayor hands him another piece of paper to sign off on as a denial of the M3 report. This way, they can avoid any humiliation that would come from the press, and Francesco would be able to keep his job. He's pretty sure that it was Franco who actually filed this for him. A nice thought, but we then hear Francesco's thoughts as he claims nothing happened. Nothing ever happens. With these words and Francesco's signature, this film is officially no longer a zombie film. From this moment forward, there are no more of the living dead, only the dying living. If that sounds confusing to you, I'm sure Francesco knows exactly how you feel. As the moment he walks the new mayor back to his car, he lays eyes on the new mayor's new secretary.
My personal secretary, Mr. Dellamorte.
A pleasure.
Again, just as before, he doesn't get her name. He only stands in the middle of the drive in awe as the mayor and her drive away, leaving him behind to ponder what it could mean that she is back, but she hasn't returned in the way that he has grown accustomed. Though she does come back late in the evening and knocks at his door like a lot of the returners have done up to this point, which is why he answers it with a gun pointed right at her skull, causing her to faint, him to drag her in, and then wait for her to wake. When she finally does, she tells him of all of her experiences that she's had since she made it to Buffalora, just how strange she's felt this whole time, and the weird sense that she gets standing next to one of the graves there in the cemetery, as well as all of these feelings as though she has known Francesco forever and has loved him forever. He questions if she loves him too, causing her to ask, who else is there? It's here that she brings up the rumor that she heard around town about him. And just before he can fully deny it, she admits that she can only love an impotent man, which is good because he agrees that that's him. It's great for her too, since she admits that she has this sort of fear that she can hardly put into words, but Francesco assures her that he doesn't have one. There's not even anything down there at all. It's to this that she then asks him to marry her. And of course, he says yes. They then spend some time together and we see Francesco running in to tell Gnaghi that he's getting married, and Gnaghi is just sharpening away at one of the shovels, and Francesco is caught off guard at his response to him about getting married. But before he can get a real answer out of Gnaghi, he hits his head on a board and gets knocked out. And we see him next at the doctor's office. But he's not here to get his head checked out. Instead, he's here in Dr. Vercesi's office having a bit of an argument that comes down to Francesco basically threatening the doctor, but also reminding him that he'll pay for this operation. Still though, Dr. Vercesi's like, yeah, that's cool, I like money, but how can I? Everybody already knows that you don't even have one. How could I remove it? No better answer than Francesco standing up to show him the proof, of which he does, and the doctor is kind of caught off guard. Then we immediately move over to surgery time with gloves, mask, lightning in the background, and some very big scissors. But the doctor stops with Francesco looking up between his legs, and he's like, what are you doing? Hurry up, let's get this over with. Dr. Vercesi's just like, please, man, don't make me do this. Not today. I can't do it, as he pulls out a syringe. And Francesco says, I told you I didn't want an anesthetic. Why not? Instead, this here is the solution to his problem. Just one shot from this giant needle will have it like he never had one in the first place, and it'll last around a month. And so Francesco's just like, okay, and begins to turn over to get the shot somewhere else. And the doctor's like, no, we got to do this in the front. And Francesco's like, what? All of this to cover up a lie that he just told her. I mean, it all could have been avoided if he would have just been honest. But instead, he does this so he can be with her. And though in the meantime, while he recovers, he is with the same person that is always there, Gnaghi, who is doing his best to take care of Francesco. Because Francesco's not doing well. Some kind of infection set in after his insane visit to the doctor, and for as bad as he feels, he definitely can't have her seeing him in this state. When she attempts to visit, she's sent away by Gnaghi. We aren't sure just how long it takes for Francesco to finally get back on his feet, but it was long enough that Mrs. Caramando is no longer on hers. Just as Gnaghi is patting the dirt into place on top of her grave, Francesco walks up declaring that he finally feels better, moving Gnaghi to hug his friend, but this is cut short the moment that Francesco realizes whose grave they are standing in front of. Their nicest client, who was always there at the cemetery more than anyone else in Buffalora, Mrs. Pia Coramondo, who did have both pictures of herself placed on her gravestone, just as Francesco suggested. After a moment of silence, Gnaghi gathers all of the shovels and sets off, leaving Francesco here, but not alone, as she makes her way over to him. She missed him and was worried about him, and has a lot to tell him. Mayor Travardi sexually assaulted her, and while she said she didn't care for the violence, they did it again after, and she enjoyed it. Meaning that her phobia has been cured, and she can no longer marry Francesco. Instead, she will marry the mayor, but they can still be friends. Nothing has changed. Travardi knows that they're friends, and they can remain friends. He supports it. Nothing has changed. She still loves Francesco. She just loves him in a different way.
Everything's just as it was. Everything.
This makes, for the fourth time, that Francesco has lost the only woman that he has ever loved. He doesn't call after her. He doesn't even chase after her. Surely hearing this took his breath away and removed the strength from his legs. The constant spinning around Francesco is so fitting for this scene, and upped even more by the dreamy melody that plays behind it. How this film is able to balance a scene like this with so much insanity and goofiness is really impressive. But again, this isn't all, as once more, the truth of who the mayor really is behind closed doors is revealed, and over 30 years has passed, and this film still rings true with a lot of underlying statements. That's the true horror here. Though for Francesco, the horror of all of this has him in the same exact spot late into the night, and we hear him speak this poem as he lies on the ground holding himself. You look for death in the clear night. You tell her you still love her. You look for death in the clear night. You tell her you still love her, that you're her slave and she's still your queen. Death, death, death. The whore. I haven't been able to figure out if this is a line from something or if this is just straight from Francesco's broken heart. If you know where it's from, or if you think this is just original, please let me know, because it would be neat to get the whole thing. And what I will let you know is that Francesco is not okay. He eventually picks himself up and drives his way into town, even considering for a moment to pick up a prostitute, but instead he settles on a bottle of wine at the local restaurant, where all he wants to be is alone and consider his options, whether it's worth it to live with this ache or to enter into death out of fear, a fear that he knows he will have to feel forever. But he can't be left alone for long, as two college girls approach him asking for a ride back to their home. Magda and her friend, someone that Francesco knows well, but here, finally, he gets her name, Laura, or at least this version of her's name. He can't refuse giving her a ride, and while he can just ignore Magda and her request for him to come inside for a drink, again, he just can't tell her no, as she claims to be able to grant wishes and offers him one, to which he wishes that she would fall in love with him.
But I'm already in love with you.
This version of her is basically the exact opposite of the last one. Laura here definitely doesn't have the same phobia, and Dr. Vercesi's shot definitely did not work. Their time together is eventually paused by Laura, who tells Francesco that he can stay the night, to which he agrees and then heads to the kitchen to get a drink. Magda, though, gets it for him, has him sit down, and then she asks if Laura mentioned that he could pay her, since, after all, school is expensive and none of them have scholarships. Luckily, though, it's only 100,000 euro. Francesco only looks down and says more to himself than to Magda that she told him she loved him, to which Magda corrects herself because that makes it 150,000. Again, he more so thinks aloud about how she just said that he could stay the night. And again, Magda has to correct the price because that's 200,000. Francesco writes a check, returns to Laura's room where she is waiting and wanting him to warm her up. Francesco walks over, grabs the heater from the floor and sets it in the bed, covering it with the blanket, and tells her that now she will be warm forever. Even before he is dressed and out of the room, the blankets have already caught on fire and are ablaze by the time he even drives away to leave behind, again, the only woman that he has ever loved.
This time I'm really through with love.
He's tried and tried again, and every time in different ways, but every time still led to failure. From a love that was mental, emotional, and physical to a love that was devoid of that physical side, to finally a love that was strictly physical. All of them ended in tragedy. And in Francesco's mind, he has done it all. So now it is time to just leave it behind. But when there's a crime like this, he can't just forget about it. After all, he left a signed check there in the home as evidence of where he was between the hours of 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. And you should know that Detective Sternero has just enough information to visit Francesco about it, but he would never actually suspect him of such a crime. Instead, he just visits him as a favor to deliver this half-burnt check back to him and to let him know that they already caught the culprit that did it. Because after he burnt the place down, he then went home and murdered his wife and daughter, and then turned himself in and is now being held in the psych ward at the hospital. This news severely angers Francesco and causes him to immediately go to the hospital to find out who in the world stole his kills. It was the one person in the world that still calls him to talk. One of his only friends, Franco. This reveal changes nothing for Francesco, as the moment he sits down next to Franco, he calls him a thief and begins to question why he would claim his kills like that. What kind of friend would do such a thing? Of course, Franco is unable to answer, being in this comatose state, meaning Francesco has to answer his own question, and he supposes that Franco could have believed he was doing Francesco a favor, keeping him out of trouble. Franco had snapped and likely felt like the last person he could reach out to was Francesco, the same guy who planted the idea that the only way he would ever be free is when he no longer had his wife and daughter around, the same friend that didn't offer any real help when Franco admitted to having suicidal thoughts. The same person that is now sitting here accusing him of being a bad friend, who also is no longer hesitant about killing the living, as the moment a nun enters the room demanding that Francesco puts out his cigarette, he tells her to shut up and then shuts her up with a bullet to the head. He then claims that it isn't like it would bother Franco. He's in a coma. Or maybe not, as Franco then spits out the tube that's in his mouth, getting Francesco's attention as he murmurs that everything is terrible. Everything except for sleep. But before he could explain any further, he is interrupted by a doctor entering the room, who of course asks the sister on the floor what she's doing, and Francesco just answers that she's praying. And the doc's just like, makes sense. Anyway, let's look at this medical equipment. Or we could just unplug everything. This guy here is in a coma that he will never wake up from. You're his friend, and he's definitely doesn't have any other relatives, so just sign this paper and we can stop taking care of him for you. Francesco barely lets the doctor get out his last words before he puts a bullet through his skull. He then sits back down, places the tube back in Franco's mouth, cocks his gun, and tells Franco that he won't let him die until he gets his explanation. Why would he steal his murders? Doesn't he think that anything Francesco does counts? But again, they are interrupted by someone entering the room. It's a nurse who screams at all of the gore and asks what happened. Francesco says that the nun and the doctor killed each other, just settling scores, but she doesn't believe him, and she looks genuinely terrified when he turns around to question her on if she believes him. Her answer makes no difference though, as Francesco still puts an end to her with a shot to the brain. This happens so quick, but I think it's important for two reasons. One, that she isn't like the doctor. The doctor didn't question Francesco on anything, or even consider where all of the blood around them came from. He was just so focused on trying to get a signature so he would have one less patient. But Nurse Francesca here, which is the actress's actual name, was immediately concerned, and she knew that she was in a bad spot and had no time to get away, showing that not everyone in the medical field is awful. We've seen it before this point that somewhere out there, some people are actually good people and good at their jobs. Franco was one of these people. Good at his job, but swamped with work to the point that he couldn't handle it anymore, and sadly was influenced by someone who was very close to death. Francesco, by killing the nurse, shows that it no longer matters who it is, what they want, how they speak to him, or why. He is fine with killing anyone that is in his way. But that isn't completely true, because he won't kill Franco. First, he needs an answer on why he would do this to his only friend. Without any more interruptions, Franco again spits out the tube from his mouth, does his best to open his eyes to look at the man sitting next to him to ask, "Who are you?"
I don't know you. I don't know who you are.
Franco's terror really begins to set in now, and it's written all over his face as he tells Francesco to go away and then begins screaming it as the camera pans back and we see that outside of this room, there is nothing else. This is it for Franco. He has truly lost and destroyed everything in his life, and the only thing that he has left is the cousin of death, sleep. Francesco is in a bit of a daze as he's leaving the hospital. Everyone else around him is in a panic, but none of them even notice him or the gun in his hand. That is until Sternero spots him and begins telling Francesco to be careful. Some maniac is killing people up on the 4th floor. And then he sees the revolver in Francesco's grip. And he tells him good that Now he's got a gun and he can actually defend himself, and then continues on his way to the crime scene with his final words of advice floating down the staircase to Francesco to get out of here fast. He takes a moment after hearing this, gathers himself, and then screams after Stanera, holding the gun up in the air, declaring that it was him. But it is too late. Everyone has already left, and Francesco Dellamorte is all alone. All alone back where we started, here in the cemetery, late at night, drunk and stumbling around, trying to figure out what he's going to do next. In the meantime, he finishes shooting the other wing off of a statue in the middle of the cemetery, close by her grave. We know when this angel lost its wings, but not exactly how or when it lost its head. Francesco steps forward and we see him from where the head should be. And from this angle, those broken wings are his. Though it's to the cloaked figure next to it that he shatters his bottle and makes his profession.
You and I are both the same. We kill out of indifference.
Sometimes it's out of love, but never in hate. He claims that now he's not even sure who is dead or who is alive. All he knows is that he's sick of killing. It's this reason that he tells Death, his so-called brother, that he's leaving the game. No more killing, no more death, and having already said no more love. As Francesco Dellamorte Dellamore bids farewell to the Reaper, the only friend he has left, Gnaghi, watches through the window, both of them unaware of what awaits them. Death is the only one with an idea of what is ahead, but still ask him where to. Francesco is on the verge of losing his humanity, but is still clinging on to his mind as he just turns and claims that it's time for him to leave, because even now the statues are beginning to speak. It's the final line from Death that is the key to understanding the entire story of Dellamorte Dellamore.
Where do you think you're going if you haven't yet understood the difference between life and me?
Francesco doesn't have an answer. He's just spent most of his life letting each day pass him by, only doing his job and not giving much thought to any of it. All the while getting closer and closer to death because he has yet to find something he would consider worth living for, until she walks into his cemetery. Though for each of his attempts, none of them work out. If he would have had a better understanding of his own cemetery, he would have known that her husband would still return once he was buried there, regardless of how long he had been dead before then. If he would have been more patient, he could have waited for her husband to return. He could have actually gotten to know her name, to understand that she wasn't dead when she returned in the ossuary. If he would have been honest, he could have saved himself and her a lot of pain by the hand of the doctor and the new mayor. And maybe if he would have done all of these, the last version of her, Laura, wouldn't have done all the same things back to him. All this time, Francesco has been so convinced about how right he is in everything, but over and over he is proven wrong, leading to this point here, where he is still convinced that love isn't for him, that it isn't worth his time, and that death isn't his to have. So it's time for him to leave it all behind, and to find somewhere that is outside of love and death. But he doesn't go alone. Gnaghi is there with him as they get into the car, and finally leave Buffalora and the cemetery behind. Francesco is determined to see the rest of the world while Gnaghi grips at the dash. He's anxious for what is ahead. As they nearly hit someone on a bike, Gnaghi yells for Francesco, who jokes about missing them and being sure to hit the next one, but Gnaghi isn't laughing. He yells again as Francesco reminds him that he needs to calm down. He knows every bump in this road, right as they hit one. Again, cracking a joke that was one of them, but it's clear to both Francesco and Gnaghi that all of this is new. Neither of them have ever been out this far. Neither of them have ever been outside of the city, out here where the highways are larger than the streets of Buffalora combined. And just through this tunnel ahead is the rest of the world. It's too much for Gnaghi to take. As the instant they enter into the tunnel, he falls asleep, leaving Francesco alone to ponder what the world looks like and coming to the conclusion that it must be beyond imagination. He can see it. The end of the tunnel, the light, it's so bright, blinding, and something else, something that forces him to slam on the brakes, throwing the box off the top of the car and Gnaghi's head into the dash. Francesco flings the door open and slowly walks forward to the end of the road.
I should have known it. The rest of the world doesn't exist.
Gnaghi stumbles from the car, bleeding severely from a gash across his face. As he falls and Francesco rushes to his side, telling him over and over again that it's okay. He wasn't hit that hard. Get up. Come on. You gotta get up. We gotta get you to the car. But Gnaghi can't. He can hardly make a sound as he finally collapses back and stops moving. Francesco continues to pull at Gnaghi, trying to get him out of this state, but nothing works. He is at the end of the world, and now he is all alone, pleading with Gnaghi not to leave him. Francesco stands, knowing what he must do as he moves to the car and pulls his revolver from the glove box and begins to load 2 of his cross-etched rounds that he made earlier. Here, he also finishes his poem. Death, death, death comes sweeping down. Filthy death, the leering clown. Death on wings, death by surprise. Veiling evil from worldly eyes. Death that's born as life succumbs, while death and love to kindred drums. Beat the time to judgment day, an actor in a passion play. Without beginning, without end, evermore, amen. This time he doesn't cover his eyes, as he has a bullet ready for each of them, and Gnaghi at the end of the barrel. He can't, though. He just can't do it. He doesn't want to do it. He said that he was done with death, and as snow begins to fall around them, Francesco kneels down beside Gnaghi, laying the gun aside, being too late to see what he had all along.
You were my best friend. Didn't even realize it.
For all of their flaws, all of their problems, all of their struggles, they always had each other, but Francesco would never admit to Gnaghi being anything more than his assistant, even if again his own actions betrayed his words. Now here, he has lost the love that should have mattered most to him. This last love, as he could call it, the one that he told Gnaghi earlier is the only one that mattered, not first love, but last love, the last love that lasts through it all, to the end of the world. The story of Dellamorte Dellamore doesn't end here for us, just for him, as after a moment, Gnaghi opens his eyes, sits up, grabs the gun, throws it off into the chasm below, and looks at Francesco to ask,
"Could you take me home, please?"
We then slowly zoom backward as the snow falls and our scene of Gnaghi and Francesco switches to the snow globe that we didn't understand in the opening credits, but that was always there on the desk of Francesco Dellamorte Dellamore. He should have known that the rest of the world didn't exist outside of love and death, because there is nothing outside of them. Francesco did what he could to find what he believed was love, often trying to wrap his hands around it before it slipped away and still having it pass between his fingers like water. When he declared that he was done with love, all that was left was death. But without love, he really began to struggle with knowing the difference between life and death, to the point that he tried to leave both of them, but not yet understanding what it was that he was leaving behind, and even being questioned by death itself.
Where do you think you're going if you haven't yet understood the difference between life and me?
It was always there in his name. The title of the film, Of Death, of Love, Dellamorte Dellamore, but it took seeing his best friend dying in front of him for something to finally change, and to know the answer to death's question. Gnaghi's death was it for Francesco. He had, in that moment, experienced death and realized that he had lost the love of a true friend all at once, fully moving him outside of love and death into a mental state of Gnaghi, a place where he is destined to repeat the same journey in his mind time and time and time again, always to end up back here at the edge of nothing, just to be shaken up once more and placed back on the desk. There is no escape for Francesco. How could there be? After all, he is Dellamorte Dellamore, now and forever. Or at least that's how I take it. I've heard others describe the film as an analogy for the end of an era in Italian filmmaking, and I've also seen other people speculate that all of this is just happening in Franco's mind, within the hospital in his comatose state, as he struggles with his new reality after killing his family and just having this full mental break from too much work and being surrounded by too many terrible people. I think those are very fun ideas, but I can't help but consider the title of the film, Dellamorte Dellamore, of love, of death, the core theme to everything that is happening here. To leave this out of any interpretation just seems off. The constant struggle of Francesco to figure out who is dead and who is alive while fighting the living dead at night and dealing with the dying living during the day is so integral to what this film is, as well as his want for her and her love, always leading him into more trouble and more heartache. All of it, though, for me, still comes back to that question from death. Where do you think you're going if you haven't yet understood the difference between life and me? So I'll ask you again, what would you say is the difference between life and death? Death that's born as life succumbs, while death and love, two kindred drums, beat the time to judgment day, an actor in a passion play, without beginning, without end, evermore. Amen. What a weird movie. Seriously though, if you made it all the way to this point through all of that, that's amazing. I got a cool fact for you. When the film was originally released, the Spanish title was actually renamed. It was Mi novia es una zombie, meaning my fiance is a zombie. That's awesome. I need that on a poster. My fiance is a zombie. Oh, and if this does actually make it into the video, I gotta let you know that I have been posting a lot of my videos and the older ones over on Spotify. Go over there and check out the Spotify. I will link it down in the description, so that way if you have Spotify and you don't want to, like, you pay for it, you don't want to deal with ads here on YouTube, you can go over there. I really would like to know your thoughts on this film, because there's just not a lot of people out there that have really given a full explanation of what they believe this movie is trying to say. It's always just like, well, that was weird. Does anybody have any answers? So of course, here's me finally throwing my hat into the ring or cemetery. But I would like to know if anybody else picked up on any of this, if I'm just crazy, if I've just thought about this movie for way too long, which is completely possible, or if what I said made so much sense that you will now have to go and buy one giant poster for your wall that says my fiance is a zombie. So with all of that, I seriously thank you for being here. I hope that you had a interesting time going through this story with me. It's one that I've wanted to do for a few years now. It's actually, I think, the very first review that I put up over on the Discord. Check that out too. I have videos planned out, I believe, all the way through Halloween. So yeah, I've got a lot of work to do. And right now I have to get to editing. So I will see you later. And if not, you can always take my hand, have an extra blessed day, so I can see you in the next one.